This is my advice to, software companies that are struggling with, investor skittishness. If you are going to make the assumption that the world is going to have an explosion of more software and AI and agents and all this than ever before, the question becomes, is what you're offering as a product, does its value increase as the number of things out there grows, or does it shrink as the number of things out there, grow? And I think, as exactly as you've described here with, your platform, it's, you're like, oh yeah, actually the more distinct things you have, people like vibe coding out there and different contexts for different data on that, it becomes increasingly more valuable to be able to have a platform, that can help pull that together, orchestrate that, govern that, in a way that's efficient, effective, reliable. The only way out is through. It's not going to get any easier. The world is not going back, to where it's been. The future is new. There is no way in hell you're going to be able to master all of this, even keep track of all of it. But that doesn't change the fact that, if you do nothing, you are going to be left behind. You are going to become irrelevant to what has the potential to be really this incredibly exciting, and transformative, new age, from boards and you just need to use AI. It's generally not helpful. Thank you for that insightful advice. Versus those who, they have enough context, and it's coming back to the word, that they have the empathy for what their teams are doing. They can give them direction. They can get the feedback loop between those things and really appreciate it. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, to your original question, I don't think I answered, is you got to lean into this stuff.
It says, technology changes exponentially, organizations change logarithmically.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the thing,
I drink my coffee in this mug every day.
Oh, I'm honored, actually. I mean, this has always been the thing, and it drives me nuts because I'm so known for that crazy MarTech landscape. People assume that I am very just pro, oh, well, you just buy some technology and then it's going to do everything you need. I mean, it has always been the case that technology is the smallest piece of the equation of making these things work. It's, what was it, Avinash Kaushik years ago, right? It said it's 10% in the tools, 90% in the people.
Welcome to Knowledge Distillation, where we explore the rise of the AI analyst. I'm your host, Katrin Ribant, CEO and founder of AskWhy. This is episode 13. And we're sort of interrupting our series about agentic commerce again to take a step back and look at how AI is changing the digital analytics industry. MarTech is at the core of what we use in digital analytics. Some of us are specialized in specific tools and build our careers on that expertise. The landscape is changing fast, and I am so happy to have none other than Scott Brinker, the godfather of MarTech, as my guest today. Scott, welcome.
Katrin, thank you so much. It's great to see you again.
Scott, you've been running Chief MarTech since 2008. I'm just dating us, right? If that's okay.
We can date much further. So that's a very complimentary one.
You have to stop at some point. You're creating the marketing technology landscape, Supergraphic, which is, that graphic with all the logos that everybody knows about. Just basically, it's been the periodic table of MarTech since 2011 now. And every year, you and Franz Riemersma put out the State of Martech report. The last one was in December, if I remember well.
Yeah, we do 2 a year. One in the spring, sort of the State of Martech, and then we do in December always one that's sort of what is MarTech looking like headed into the next year? So it was MarTech for 2026, which by now we're in February, it's probably already way out of date.
Oh, certainly. And within all of that, you also spent 8 years as a VP of Platform Ecosystem at HubSpot, building out their partnership and integration ecosystem. And did I mention that you also hold degrees from Columbia and MIT Sloan? So, with all of that, two questions to begin with. Can you tell us the origin? I'm sorry, I'm sure you've done this 1,000 times, but please, can you tell us the origin story of the MarTech landscape? And tell us about what you are thinking about these days, like as in now versus, what you were
Mhm.
thinking then.
Sure. All right. Well, before I even like came up with that landscape, I was basically building a career at this intersection between the worlds of IT and marketing. Which you go back in time, and these were two disciplines, two departments that were about as opposite ends of the spec. I mean, if you'd gone to your like high school guidance counselor, in like the 90s, and you're like, I'm thinking about my career. So they're like, okay, well, IT is over here and, marketing is over here. But of course, obviously, with the world going digital, it was fated. I mean, these two worlds were going to collide and entangle and do all sorts of wondrous things together. But I was sort of very early on serving as I had an engineering background, but I love marketing, and so I was sort of doing this like shuttle diplomacy between these two worlds. And one of my missions that I had was to try and help chief marketing officers, senior marketing leaders understand, hey, you really need to be thinking more about these technologies you're using and the operations for it. And again, most career marketing executives at that time are like, what? Why would I do that? I'm in marketing, And so I created that very first MarTech landscape, kind of as if you were in a court case. This would be like, let me introduce Exhibit A to the case here, of just showing them like, look at all the different things that these different categories of these different products that you may not be using all these, but odds are you're actually using a lot of them, and that these things have become
Mhm.
so foundational to you being able to execute the strategy and the vision that you have, and that was part of where the light bulb went off of like, oh, wow, I guess actually marketing does have a lot of technology in it. And that was fine. That was all I was hoping to do with that first
Mhm.
one. And there were like 150 technologies on that landscape, which at the time, everyone, including me, was like, "Oh my God, 150 marketing technologies? How will we ever keep track?"
I remember very well. I worked in an agency. I worked at Havas at the time, and I remember, like, literally, I printed it out because we were still doing that occasionally at the time, especially for the more senior people. And I distributed copies in meeting, going, "Look, 150 tools. It's crazy."
Insane. And everyone's like, okay, well, clearly this will consolidate. And so I kept going back to it like year over year, mostly because I was just wanting to update, like, okay, well, what's changed? What's out there? And that was when this pattern of what essentially was exponential growth for a number of years. It went from 150 to 350 to then all of a sudden 1,000 and then 2,000 and 4,000, and this was certainly something I wouldn't have predicted. And I guess now in the hindsight, we realize this actually wasn't unique to marketing at all. It was,
Yeah.
the shift to moving into the cloud, the dynamics of, so many ways in which the barriers to entry to creating software just
Mhm.
kept dropping and dropping. I mean, now, boy, there's not a category on the planet that isn't like flooded.
Yeah.
MarTech is actually, it turns out, is one of the smaller categories on these. Like if you look at like, say, the fintech industry, there's something like 4 times as many products out there as, MarTech. So anyways, that was the origin story, was like just trying to help persuade people to like realize, and I think even the landscape, it's become less useful over time because like really, who can read the tiny little micro dots on any of this? The one story I think it's still useful for is it helps people recognize, okay, this is a very large ecosystem of things, and it is constantly evolving and it's constantly changing. And so if your narrative is like, oh, well, I just need, this one thing from this one vendor, and I'm all set, you're probably not looking close enough.
Yeah. That's for sure. And, on your point about the lowering of the barrier of entry to creating software, at the time of recording, we are at the end of 2 weeks of what has been deemed as the SaaS Apocalypse. Obviously, Cloud Code released 11 plugins, Cloud Cowork, sorry, released 11 plugins, and Wall Street went like, what? Everybody can now do all these things that all these big SaaS companies rely on for margins. They're doomed. Software is dead. Massive loss on the market, right? 300 billion of marketing capital evaporated from stock.
Yeah.
I think in 2 days after the release. So, what do you think about that? Is software dead?
Well, as someone who still holds a certain amount of HubSpot stock, I'm like, ouch, that hurt. I don't know. I mean, I'm in the camp, and there's a number of other people who I think hold the same view. Is you got to look at a couple different things here. There's certainly the short-term view of this is software isn't going anywhere. I mean,
Yeah,
all
I
these
agree.
businesses, marketing, they all run on these foundational systems, your CRM, your marketing automation system, that's not going to go away anytime soon. And I also think this idea of, I don't buy into the notion that people are going to vibe code every piece of application, even moving further into the future. That being said, I think two things are true. I think people are going to be doing a lot more vibe coding at a higher level. They probably don't want to build all their own infrastructure, but they've got a whole bunch of ideas of their own special thing that they want to do. And I think companies that really lean into enabling that instead of trying to fight it, have an opportunity to be really strong platform plays, in this next generation. But the other thing we have to acknowledge is, well, I don't buy into the narrative that, every mid-level manager is going to vibe code their own CRM. The reality is, once again, the barriers to creating professional software have also just dropped and are continuing to drop more. And so the risk isn't like, oh yeah, my customers are just going to vibe code their own CRM. The risk is, there's actually going to be 1,000 other companies that are trying to build professional CRM platforms for particular niches with particular ways. And I think that's a real risk. And so, while I think the market has overreacted in the short term, I think we are, and I should probably disclaim, this is not financial advice. I
Oh
whatever you
yes,
do, you
let's
definitely
disclaim.
don't want
No,
financial
no,
advice
no
from me.
no financial advice.
But I think over time, and it's it's weird because the other thing here is, and I was just writing about this earlier today, I actually think the future of software collectively is massive. I think we're going to
Oh,
see
I agree.
more software than ever. I think the challenge is it's going to be the companies that are sort of these large SaaS products today, the moats they've had and the business they've been able to,
Yeah.
defend. It's changing, and that doesn't mean there isn't necessarily a way forward for them. I'm actually pretty optimistic there are ways forward for them, but it's going to be disruptive, and there's a lot of uncertainty. And so while the market may have overreacted, I'm not sure the trend of hey, SaaS businesses as we knew them are probably going to look different over the next 10 years. I think that instinct's pretty accurate.
That I think is absolutely accurate, right? I think the overreaction of the market, and again, not financial advice, right? You remember when DeepSeek released, and that was the overreaction in the market with the Nvidia stock, mostly because very few people really understand the cost of inference. So they confuse the cost of trading and the cost of inference. Um, Today we see this reaction because, oh, now everybody can vibe code software. Yes, vibe coding a little solution for yourself isn't exactly coding a complex enterprise piece of software, right? And I think what tends to be underestimated, and this is something, with Datorama, was something that we really had to explain a lot to our investors and to the market is it's not because all of a sudden something becomes way lower barrier to entry. Like, for example, Google releases Data Studio and all of a sudden you can do most of what we do for free. Yeah, well, yeah, sure, you can. But it's very different to do a chart for free, connect to an API and do a chart for free and actually do enterprise-based reporting for your advertising accurately every day across all your stakeholders, etc. These are two completely different things, right? I think this is sort of the same thing. I think that, yes, a lot of people are going to vibe code solutions for themselves, and that's fantastic because that will heighten the expectation that people have of software can solve problems. And
Mhm.
there will be more software used. And on the other hand, I just want to show you this. Do you see my screen?
Ah, I remember that. Yeah.
Do you remember that? I still drink my coffee. So for the audience, if you're on audio only, I am showing Scott a very bad picture of a mug that Scott used to give out. Was this 10, 15 years ago?
Yeah, probably that. Yeah, at the
Something
MarTech
like
con.
that.
Yeah.
And the mug says, so it shows basically a table with an executive, a meeting table with an executive, and then three snails Scott, maybe you just describe it. It's going to be better.
Sure. Yeah. So the executive, round the conference table with these snails, but the executive is like just excitedly saying, like, now that we've agreed on the marketing technologies we need, let's move quickly to integrate them into our operations. Which, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's funnier when you see it, I think. But yeah, I mean, the reality isn't. It's funny. This has always been
And then
my.
the tagline says, technology changes exponentially, organizations change logarithmically.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, this is
I
the
drink
thing.
I drink my coffee in this mug every day.
Oh, I'm honored, actually. I mean, this has always been the thing, and it drives me nuts because I'm so known for that crazy MarTech landscape. People assume that I am very like just pro, like, oh, well, you just buy some technology and then it's going to do everything you need. I mean, it has always been the case that the technology is the smallest piece of the equation of making these things work. It's what was it? Avinash Kaushik years ago, right? It said it's like 10% in the tools, 90% in the people. To me, that still holds true.
It really does, no question. So going back to the software aspect, you've outlined this idea of systems of truth and systems of context. Can you unpack that? Because I think it's very relevant to what we were just talking about the SaaS apocalypse.
Yeah, I mean, again, like for years we used to talk about systems of record and systems of engagement, and that's sort of where I
Yeah.
see this as an evolution on that. The thing about systems of record is, turns out there's never one system of record. I mean,
No,
there's just like a tremendous amount of different sources of data, that have relevance in different contexts. And so part of what you want to know is like, okay, well, where do I get the truth of a particular piece of data? It doesn't necessarily have to all be in the exact same place, but you have to know what is the authoritative source and how do I get to it? And so that's why I think about, yeah, this sort of thing of like, systems of truth. I sometimes run to wonder, it's a catchy label, but truth is, I don't know, it starts to like get me thinking philosophically, like, well, what is truth? But all right. um
right.
uh but the shift from like systems of engagement to systems of context is, the systems of engagement were always framed that way because they're like, oh, and this is where we engage with the customer. Don't get me wrong, we still have these systems, we still engage with customers, but to me what we're seeing more and more is this idea of like, okay, a lot of those engagement points, it's about how do we deliver the right context, like the right information, the right service, exactly what the customer wants there. But turns out it's not just customer touch points that we want to do that with. It's employee touch points. It's like, oh, I'm looking to do this. I have to accomplish this piece of work. How do I what can I engage with that is going to make that as easy for me as possible of like, okay, yeah, here's the relevant data for it. Here's the relative actions I want to be able to take on it. And this has exploded even more as we started talking about agents coming into, the world of like, okay, you have all these agents. One of the things I actually really like is this phrase of context engineering, that people have started talking about with AI and AI agents, which my oversimplified version is kind of an evolution of prompt engineering, where it's not just about like, okay, what's the set of instructions, we give to, an AI to, do something, but it's like, oh, actually, we don't want to just give it instructions here. What we want to do is we want to give it access to the relevant data. You throw all the data at it, efficacy, costs, all sorts of things. So you really want to like, what's the contextually relevant data? Are there particular tools that agent is going to want to be able to use to like execute whatever you're asking it to do? And to be able to package that up so that an agent, as much as either similar as it would have been for like a human employee, like how do they have things right where they need it, or a customer who has a touch point, how are they getting what they need? I think of all of that as like this delivery of context. And I'll also be the first to say, I think that's really hard. It's, we're still at the mode where a lot of companies are still trying to just get these systems connected. Integration is by no means a solved problem in most, tech stacks. But just connecting the systems doesn't automatically deliver that context for you. I mean, like really being able to understand like how you curate in the moment in that particular context of what you're looking to do, the right tools, the right action, the right instructions. That's challenging. That's why people today, like they call it context engineering, because you actually have to do a lot of real engineering work to make that happen. But it's
It
also where I
really
think there's a lot
is.
of opportunity.
It really is. And I'm just going to do a shameless plug right now because it's just too relevant for me to pass this up. This is exactly what is at the center of the thesis of Ask Why. Because when I start, obviously I've built analytics platforms before, and I'm shockingly rebuilding an analytics platform. Um, and so I was thinking, okay, so what is the actual central problem with analytics today? And I was like, it's really not in the tools. The tools are good enough today. That wasn't the case 15 years ago, right? 15 years ago, if you're working with big data, the tools really were not good enough. But then came the modern data stack, and everything can be better, but honestly, they're good enough. The problem is the continuity of context between the steps in the analytics process. Because when you do an analytics process, you have to connect to data, you have to bring it in, you have to organize it, you have to then model it for certain use cases to answer certain questions. And within that, basically what you are doing is you're taking a piece of reality, you are creating a model of that piece of reality, a data model. You are manipulating that model to get insights, answers, whatnot, truth, things. And then you're retranslating that into reality. If at any point in time you lose the context continuity in there, your answers are going to be irrelevant or false, right? And in marketing, the very, very basic version of that is Analyst does a dashboard to analyze spend and revenue, gets in front of the marketer goes like, oh, revenue, where does that revenue come from? And now you have to retrace everything that figure has been through, that probably has gone through 3 different people, 5 different systems, and follows the rules of one particular department and not the other. And that might be the right rules for this person, and that might not be the right rules for this person. And it's not like there's one set of rules that is right for every department. Finance recognizes revenue different from marketing, and that's completely fine. It's different usage of the same variables. And so creating an engine that will persist the context, not just the context, the technical context, but also the business context, the different places where all of these things exist, including the head of different people, that at the moment where they're doing the analysis, go, oh, actually, let's not forget the tagging was wrong in July and we got revenue doubled at that point. We have to halve the revenue in this particular period of time. So keeping all of these traces and then creating, exactly as you explained, creating the engine that is going to do the clustering and the ability to have a retrieval that is relevant to the particular person and the particular circumstances in which they are prompting an LLM at this particular moment in time, and inject the right context into it so that the results are relevant. That is a really, really, really hard challenge. It's
Yeah.
really interesting, but it's a really hard challenge, right? But that is, I think, what is going to be needed in the future to make these disparate systems work. Because, as you said, there is no situation where we're going to the one system of truth. If that ever was possible with vibe coding, that is not happening. On the opposite, pieces of information that might not be deemed as institutionally important enough, but that are actually important at certain moment in time for certain people, will exist increasingly in fragmented places. And so that content continuity is really, in my opinion, combined with natural language as an interface to all the tools that you use in analytics, is really what will allow analysts to be able to serve the questions that to answer the questions that they're asked to answer better, better, faster, or at all, quite frankly, because there's a point where at a certain level of fragmentation, it becomes impossible.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, yes, that example is like the perfect way of, yeah, really understanding like why this idea of like, okay, actually platforms and products that help us manage context, there's real value to be had there because it is incredibly complex. I mean, you even just described it like, all right, just in the analytics side of it, I assure you, you take pretty much every other facet of, business operations, and it's a very similar story.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
and it's one of these things where, and this is my advice to, software companies that are struggling with, investor skittishness. Um, if you are going to make the assumption that the world is going to have an explosion of more software and AI and agents and all this than ever before, the question becomes, is what you're offering as a product, does its value increase as the number of things out there grows, or does it shrink as the number of things out there grow? And I think
Yes.
like as exactly as you've described here with your platform, it's you're like, oh yeah, actually the more distinct things you have, people like vibe coding out there and different contexts for different data on that, it becomes increasingly more valuable to be able to have a platform, that can help pull that together, orchestrate that, govern that, and in a way that's efficient, effective, reliable. And anyway, so that's why I'm actually still very quite bullish on the opportunities
Me too.
for software platforms.
Not financial advice, but yes, me too. Let's bring it back to, obviously, Knowledge Distillation as a podcast. We explore the rise of the AI analyst. So I kind of want to bring it back to the role of the AI analyst. If I'm an analyst listening to this today, what I'm hearing is basically my job is no longer building dashboards for humans to look at, really. I mean, it kind of is. But my job really is to become a context engineer, to understand how to actually use these tools in order to serve my my goal, which is ultimately answer the question that people ask me to answer with data, right? Whether it's through dashboards or not, I think it's completely, whatever. That's actually irrelevant, I think. So that's what I see the main sort of shift in the analyst role. And for that, I think that in terms of skills, if I were an analyst today in my, 20s, 30s, and I had like 20, 30 years of career in front of me, I'd be thinking, so how do I need to upskill? What do I need to learn? And my personal opinion about that is you need to, one, understand your tool really profoundly. You do need to understand how LLMs work. If you don't understand the basics of how your tool works, it's not going to go great. Then you need to understand how to talk to the tool. And talking to the tool is really prompt and context engineering. And that's an art and a science. It's really something that takes practice and understanding of how context windows work, how attention mechanisms work, and how to kind of structure increasingly complex and long prompts in order to create an increasingly accurate result, right? The third one is, for as much as we may not be writing code as much, we are going to be reading code increasingly. And reading code that you haven't written is a skill. It's really a skill. And so that's also something like, in terms of technical skills, I'm certainly not of the school of you should not know how to code anymore. On the contrary, I'm of the school of you should know how to code, and you should know how to understand how others code and how the machine codes. Because you're going to have to deconstruct that logic and put it together, and because you're ultimately still responsible for that answer to the stakeholder, right?
Yeah.
So about, when you started the MarTech landscape, you basically coined the rise of the marketing technologist, right? That basically comes from that moment. What do you see today with the analyst versus at that time with the marketing technologists? Similarities, differences, advice.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot. I really like your point here about like knowing how to code is still actually incredibly valuable. It's funny.
Yeah.
So I started my life as a software engineer. In all fairness, I was a pretty crappy software engineer. It's a good thing I moved on to other things professionally. But, it's probably been about 10 years or so since I'd actually done any hands-on coding, and then like a few months back, I was like, all right, well, now let's, take Claude Code and like, let's start doing stuff. And it's fascinating, just having enough of a perspective of, like, how this works. I mean, not necessarily always knowing, like, okay, what's the latest library on this? Um, the ability to both, A, tell Claude Code what I want in a way that is increases the odds that it's going to give me what I want, but also then being able to, based on what it comes back with, because these things are very rarely one shot, solutions. It's sort of an iterative dance, being able to understand enough of like what it's doing and like, okay, where is this going wrong? And to be able to do that iteration back and forth. Um, like, it actually lets you create really amazing stuff. I've seen this, like, a number of my friends who are really good engineers, oh my goodness, like, the productivity they have with, things like Claude Code is phenomenal because they understand so deeply what needs to be built and how it needs to be built, that they can really masterfully, have these things, doing the work, to actually get stuff built, but then they also have the ability to provide, like, the judgment and the, review, um, and so I totally see that expanding to, other domains, such as you say, from, an analyst perspective. So I don't know. I mean, as a marketing technologist, I think the advice is very similar. Like, you really do have to understand these technologies. And even though I'm a writer, I wish I could impart it to you through words alone. You have to be hands-on. This is it's a skill you
You
learn
do.
through doing. There's not enough YouTube videos in the world to, implant it in your brain. But yeah, if you get a hands-on and you do that and you keep doing it. I mean, well, actually, I see it, some of the executives I admire most are those who still get actually very hands-on with these things. Not because you want your CEO, being the one actually writing the code. But because like if your CEO actually knows how this stuff works and they have a sense of like their ability to have that influence, their strategy, the way they think about like this evolution to just understand the relationships across things. That's invaluable. And I mean, I'm not gonna name names or anything like this, but I see it all the time. Like I can talk to an executive and know like all right, you've never actually put any hands on any, you have no idea what you're talking about. And they're usually the ones that are especially confident that they know what they're talking about. And it's funny how that works, versus those who like, yeah, I mean, they've actually like embraced it and they've experimented, and it's funny. Part of why they perhaps it's not a lack of confidence, but they often then have a little bit more humility too, because it's like they actually have that deeper sense of like, okay, I've actually personally felt, how this is changing, the velocity of how it's changing, why, what that is like. It gives them a lot more empathy, I think, for their teams.
Yes.
One of the things that drives me nuts, is that sort of we've gone through this over the past year of just these edicts, from boards and say, you just
Oh,
need
yes.
to use AI. Um, yeah, it's
Yeah,
generally
sure.
not helpful. Thank you for that insightful advice. Versus those who, yeah, they have enough like context, and it's coming back to the word, that they have the empathy for what their teams are doing. They can give them direction. They can get the feedback loop between those things and really appreciate it. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, yeah, to your original
And
question, which I don't think I answered, is like you got to lean into this stuff.
I think it's a matter of grounding.
Um,
I think that the problem when you stop being hands-on, and this is really something you have to manage in your career, right? When you start as a junior, you're very hands-on. You're a doer. And you execute things, and you become very familiar with the most analysts anyway, like the actual operational aspects of what you're doing. As you grow in your career, that you have less and less time for that. You have less and less time to keep up with what's new. And I think from that perspective, this period is particularly challenging because the pace of change is, and I mean, we've been through a bunch of changes, right, in our careers. The pace of change today is really faster than anything I have seen before, faster and more profound. But if you do not put the time into having some hands-on experience, you won't be grounded in reality when you make decisions.
mm,
It's not possible. I don't care how smart you are. It's just really not possible if you don't have and if you also, this is something that I would say from experience, having seen things like this before. When you have a period of change like this, where you are at the very beginning of something that is changing very fast and sort of trying to find itself, nobody knows. So everything's changing and it's changing in a way that is small iterations. And it's like, obviously the word comes in my head in French, which is not helpful. Sort of like feeling in the dark, right?
mhm.
Um, if you miss the basics in that period, the entry ticket to understanding the basics of whatever that thing is become exponentially higher when you're 3, 4 years into it and it becomes a more mature sort of corpus of knowledge. We've seen that with social media. We've seen that with obviously mobile. We've seen that with a number of things, right? So if you don't create the grounding at the very onset, it becomes much more expensive to do after. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely, because it's like, ah, you just I will go back, by the way, and just acknowledge, so when I left HubSpot, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to do this MarTech analyst work full time because there's just so much changing. At least now, if I'm doing it full time, I'll be able to keep up. Okay, that was a fantasy. I mean, I'm doing this stuff 24/7. I love it, and I can't keep up. I mean,
Yeah.
literally, like any given day, just the
Mhm.
flood. And I'm not talking like, oh, there's this little thing over here, and I mean, like really significant things. I've got this backlog of like major things that have changed. I'm like, all right, yeah, they're gonna have to get to that. So I think this is one moment where you just have to have enormous empathy. If you
Yes.
feel like you're falling behind on everything, you're not relative to everyone else.
Mhm.
That thing like the Lake Wobegon effect of like all the children are above average. It's almost like inverse Lake Wobegon effect here, where everyone feels like, yeah, I'm below average on this. Yeah, no, I don't get this.
Yeah.
It's like a really hard time doing that. But yeah, I mean, sometimes the way I phrase this is the only way out is through. It's not going to get
Yeah.
any easier. The world is not going back, to where it's been. The future is new. There is no way in hell you're going to be able to master all of this, even like even keep track of all of it.
Mhm.
But that doesn't change the fact that, like, if you do nothing, you are going to be left behind. You are going to become irrelevant to what has the potential to be really this incredibly exciting, and transformative, new age. Um, so you just have to start putting in the work. I don't know. You would never guess given, but like I exercise, and it's like one of these things of like, hey, listen, you know, I could do a lot more exercise. I could do a lot more bodybuilding, all this. Not gonna happen. But actually just even like, doing like some runs, doing, a half hour to an hour, a certain number of days a week. Like, okay, that is by no means like this expert paragon, of the exercise world. But it's like, oh, actually just doing that, like, I'm healthier, I'm like happier. I'm like, you put in stuff not because you're going to be like the world's greatest, at all these things, but because like doing a certain portion of this just becomes part of like how you live. And I don't know if this metaphor
I
is
think
actually
that's
holding up
fabulous
or
advice.
not.
I really think that's fabulous advice because yes, it is a lot and it's overwhelming absolutely for everyone, right? But consistency in effort, and it doesn't have to be an effort that is going to overwhelm you. Consistency in effort in just
Oh,
chomping at it a little bit every day and building. And for a long time, you will feel like you understand nothing. Like, and then it will start building, right? Um, and I agree. The analogy with exercise is really spot on. I think. I also exercise a little bit every day, and I would not be able to do that much more. But because yeah, well, because I'm at the
yeah,
age
it's a
where
little bit
I
busy
don't
running,
really.
running a
Well,
startup.
but
I'm
also
familiar
also
with
at a
this.
certain age, there's only so much you can do, right? So so like but it does compound. It really does compound,
Mhm.
and and it does compound and does give you that sense of grounding of at some point, okay, yeah, I have these bases of knowledge. I have these like I'm starting to actually understand, and words that I could not place in a relevant context 3 months ago. Now, when I hear the word, I actually understand what it is, and I actually understand what this sentence means. I mean, this really reminds me of the rise of ad tech,
Mm.
where, we were all the kings and queens of acronyms. And oh my God, we had so many acronyms and they were all very bad. And when we started talking in between people who were in marketing, like we would understand each other. Absolutely nobody around would have any idea what we were talking about between the DSP, the supply side, the DMP, the etc. No one would understand anything. And I think this is something, but you just practice it enough and hear it enough, it starts meaning something.
Yeah, no, well, it's a language, yeah, and it's a mental model too.
Yeah.
I think that's what it comes down to. It's like, we've had to update our mental model, certain
Yes.
times. Obviously computing, different mental model, internet, different mental model, mobile, and so on. This one, I think you had said earlier, like I agree, it is both a much larger transformative change, and it's also happening at a speed that's unprecedented. But yeah, it's basically
And
another thing like, okay, you need to update your mental model to like, okay, this is what work is going to be like. This is what the world is going to be like. This is where I add value, what I can do. How can this augment me? And yeah, I mean, again, I always pause to acknowledge that's hard. I mean, change is
it is.
hard. Most humans, me included, like this is. sort of default reaction of like, I'd really rather not change. I was actually pretty comfortable where I
Yeah.
was. And, you have to it takes effort to like overcome that. And so, I always am wary of coming across as somehow being flippant of like, well, listen, all you need to do is change your whole mental model and, then you're good to go. It's like, no, that's really freaking
What's the
hard.
problem with that?
No.
So just to add a little layer to that, the tools are now starting to act on their own. And so in your latest MarTech report, you've laid out a framework of 3 types of AI agents in marketing. Could you walk us through that?
Sure. So obviously from the MarTech landscape, there's nothing I love better than like categorizing little logos on a slide.
Of course.
Everybody needs a hobby. But as I was trying to think about like, okay, how
Can
is
I
this
ask
whole,
you, you don't do that manually, do you?
well, not anymore. In the early days I did because I was
Yeah.
a crazy person. But yeah, now it's all programmatic and yeah. But yeah, actually the one for the agents I did do manually because for me it wasn't even about producing a slide so much as it was my process of just sort of thinking through like, okay, what is the hierarchy? What's the sort of structure of what's happening here? And it struck me that uh, there felt like there were 3 very different kinds of agents. When we talk about agents in marketing, and to me, the 3 buckets were okay. There's a set of agents that are for marketers. They're the things that basically help us do the tasks we're doing behind the scenes, whether it's like data analysis, helping to produce creative, like managing something, in the internal workflow. Very useful. A whole bunch of actually really cool
Mhm.
agents, that have coming out there. Second kind of agent is what I would call agents for customers. And these are agents that are still actually controlled by the marketers or by, the go-to-market teams. But they're agents that are designed to interact with customers. I mean, the most obvious example is these like customer service, chatbots on websites, which, by the way, we can acknowledge those chatbots on websites have been around for years. They've
Yes.
largely sucked,
Yes.
but in the past year or so, none of them have gotten really good because, leveraging these LLMs, their like
Mhm.
conversational capabilities are much better. And we're getting smarter about connecting the right sort of data sources to them that, I mean, again, they're still not perfect, but the resolution rates of customers being able to get the answer they want, quickly, painlessly, it's actually pretty impressive. But
Mhm.
anyway, so this is a thing that it's interesting because there are also agents like people talk about AI SDRs, and things like this, where it's an agent that's purports to help the customer, maybe can, but they're controlled by the marketer. It's still part of like, okay, this is my go to market. This is one of my channels of go to market is I'm running these agents to engage with customers. The third kind of agent is the one to me that is the most fascinating. And this is where I call agents of customers because they're not agents that are under any control of the marketer. They're agents that the customer is like, yeah, and easiest examples of now of what people are doing is like ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini and stuff, where they're saying like, hey, I want you to go out and I want you to like, I'm considering like switching CRMs, what are my choices? Can you like aggregate this data? Who's doing what? Set off deep research on it. It comes back and it's this information. I mean, and by the way, you can go really crazy with this. I had an example that I think got me in some trouble with some people where, particularly in SaaS, often for SaaS at a certain kind, one of the things that's actually hardest for buyers is pricing transparency. Just partly because these are
Yeah.
complex products, but also partly because, the sellers sort of leverage that as a way to, move people, through their funnel. Man, I'm telling you, you turn to these agents on that deep research to be like, all right, what's really happening here on pricing? What should I expect to pay? How should I negotiate, for getting,
Mhm.
it's kind of crazy. And so what's interesting is these are agents under the control of customers that are forcing changes in how marketing organizations are going to have to interact with the world. The other example, very common, is like the shift from just Google classic Google search results and SEO to like, okay, now everyone's using these, AI assistants, to sort of like replace the way they think about finding information. So now all marketers are like, oh, okay, I used to optimize for one agent. It was the Google bot, and we, 20, 25 years, we got pretty good at optimizing for that one bot. Now I've got this like flood of other things. I'm like, yeah, how do I optimize to make sure that I'm serving that agent well? So when that agent is answering something for a customer, I'm showing up where I should. It's these agents of customers that are the real disruption.
And yes, and those agents of customers, I think one of the really huge disruption for marketers recently is the agent with commerce, right? So ChatGPT with commerce, commerce protocol, etc. I actually have this theory that I'd like to test with you, that this is going to be a shift it's basically going to kick off a huge work stream in marketing departments, because that is, in my opinion, comparable to the mobile replatforming, because it's a shift in the customer experience, slash the shift to Amazon, because there's a loss of relationship with the customer. So it impacts your relationship with the customer, your loyalty programs, etc. And the GA4 migration, because really, when you think about it, what needs to be done here is you have to optimize your website for two very distinct audiences, human and non-human, and not just the bots, the Google bots that are actually actively going to look at very specific things in a very specific way that is not at all the way that the Google bots are looking at things, right? Commerce bots don't see JavaScript. It would be tremendously expensive if they did. It's not possible, right? So now you have to basically restructure your entire website so that those types of bots can at least find the information. Then you have to get into the context window, an art and a science, right? And then from there, so because you've redone your website, you do need to redo your data layer. All your tracking has to change, right? You have to rebuild your data layer. You have to think about how are you going to measure this? You used to have a funnel. Now, for a large portion of your traffic, you will not have a funnel. You have all of a sudden going to have a sales. You will not really know anything about that sales, not know anything of use for your optimizations about that client. And you also lose the ability to tell your story as a brand, to push the different cross-selling, upselling, etc. You now need to rethink about how you create a relationship with this customer, if you are obviously in a category where it makes sense to have a relationship with that customer, right? So I can see sort of this massive work stream coming. I think consultants are going to be very happy. Because the agents with commerce, agents of customers with commerce are going to really disrupt marketing. Yeah. What is your view on that?
Yeah, no, I'm completely with you. I mean, that's another variation of the sort of agents of customers that,
Yes.
yeah, it changes the way in which businesses and customers are going to find each other, engage each other. And yeah, you're right. It's not just a Google bot. It's like almost every facet of how we've orchestrated these digital interactions, with customers and optimize them. Yeah, it's all up for changing. In fact, actually, one that we don't talk enough about, I think is going to be huge, is I think we are this close to seeing an agentic revolution in email, where like the moment, email agents get good enough that the customer's like, my crazy inbox and all, I'm just not paying any more attention to that. The agent is going to manage all of that for me, and it's going to surface things up to me when I need it. And if I wanted to go find something, it knows in the inbox who to go talk to, and it'll go negotiate. And I mean, that's again just another one where you're like, okay, for marketers, there's like a handful of things we've sort of like hung our hats on. One was like, hey, SEO and organic search. All right, we figured this out. We got it. This is good. Now that's all being disrupted. Damn it. The other one, like email marketing as a way of like, okay, well, we now have a relationship where relationship is defined like I have your email address.
Yes.
Now, this is how I use this as a channel. And while the efficacy of email has slowly degraded over time because of all these, bad actors, nothing like the sort of disruption that I think is going to be parallel to what we saw from, SEO to AEO in email. But here's the thing, I'm actually optimistic that that's more of an opportunity than for the right kinds of marketers, the right kinds of businesses, because at the end of the day, marketers who even have good and valuable ways to engage their customers through email, they suffer as a result of the fact that their email is still kind of lost in the sea of all
Yes.
this sort of crap. It's the same thing like SEO over time. Let's face it. I mean, just the Google organic results, just they degraded over time. It just wasn't because, it's not that there weren't good marketers using SEO tactics to do good content. It's that they had to compete with all these not so good marketers using those exact same tactics. And it's one of the reasons why the AEO stuff I actually am pretty bullish on too, because it's like, okay, if these AI engines, the way they think and reason have a greater likelihood of surfacing like the true signal out of the noise, then those people who are truly providing the signal, that's a win.
Yeah,
And
that's
so I
true.
think we'll see the same thing in email. And it's one of the reasons why I'm hopeful that, you know, your concern here of like, if I no longer have the e-commerce experience that I've had with customers before, but I've got agents doing this stuff, yeah, is that just going to completely eliminate all these other options for, upsells and cross sells? I'm curious to see if that evolves because, I don't know that I mean, maybe if it's just about replacing, toilet paper, yeah, I can really set that thing on
Sure.
autopilot. But I think for actually a lot of goods and a lot of services, I might want an agent to be helping me with things here. But there are other dimensions of the sales experience that even if I'm having an agent help me with it, I might want the agent to be actually paying attention to these things and helping me like, yeah, what is that cross sell opportunity and why is that good? Okay, maybe the agent is
Mm.
providing a little bit of, governance on my behalf in that. But if the agent actually understands more deeply what really matters to me, and the agent is operating with the agency for me, not the seller, again, for sellers who are actually in a position to offer what's meaningful and relevant to me, the agent might actually be able to do a better job of surfacing that to me than I would have randomly found on my own.
I imagine that obviously you get exposed to all sorts of new emerging technology. I imagine everybody who has a piece of technology reaches out to you because they want to be on the map, right? So you get to see things that, not everybody gets to see, whether they make it on the map or not. Do you see anything interesting coming up sort of in terms of tools, technologies, concepts, ways of addressing this agents of customer wave for marketers and analysts? That kind of like would address this notion of a certain degree of disintermediation of the relationship between the marketer and the customer.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's early. Like the one category where it's still early, but like, things move fast. Is this explosion of these, AI engine optimization tools. I mean, there's now hundreds of them, but there's actually like a couple dozen that have become like really fast growing, successful companies. Um, so I think that's a real example there. It's part of the challenge is the landscape's so wide and so diverse. I
Yes.
just have to say I am by no means an expert in every single one of those categories. One category I pay attention to, and this is because coming from the role I did at HubSpot, and even just my work for the MarTech landscape overall, is I'm always fascinated by ecosystems. And one of the things I've just felt over the years is most companies do a really terrible job of activating their ecosystems and leveraging their ecosystems as a way to not just win customers, but service customers. there's a lot we could do to make those things, like much better win-win-win relationships. And
Mhm.
there's been some interesting companies, and steadily there's becoming more and more with AI that are about empowering companies to do a much better job of treating the ecosystem as a core part of their go-to-market and their value proposition. Now, for me, that's mostly been relevant in the tech industry, but what is very intriguing to me is this is not limited to tech. I mean, almost any business in any industry, when you really sort of step back and see the threads, like, okay, for your customer, who else do they work with for what thing, what that, you actually start to realize ecosystems are everywhere. We've just had a very poor ability, partly mental model, partly just
Mhm.
a lack of tools to be able to like really leverage ecosystems as a more significant part, of how we build durable businesses. And to me, in some ways, because of the incredible noise, with AI and all this explosion, I actually think ecosystems, like the value you can have there, it's stronger than ever. And so, anyways, because I am passionate about that, I look at a lot of tools that are coming out of that
Yes,
space, and
of
I'm
course.
very optimistic about it.
But that's fascinating because I can see how that would have a very different ability to execute with the ability to manage context that we have today versus before. I can totally see how that would be a place where there would be expansion, of course. But I kind of want to bring this back to the analyst persona and the analyst persona working within an environment and organization. In the rise of the marketing technologist era, your premise was that marketing has to become a technology powered discipline and that marketing always needed technical people. And you said something that I really liked, which is it's not about finding the theoretical perfect tool, it's what you're going to do with it, which that is perennially true. That is just that will never not be true, right? And that is where the real work is, and that's true, right? Obviously, today, how do you see the marketing teams need to evolve? Obviously, as it comes to analytics, but as it comes to generally their need to have certain skill sets within the team as opposed to outside of the team.
Yeah. I mean, one of the ways I've been thinking about this is grossly oversimplifying the work of marketing into three buckets: the creative and strategy, which is what people always think of as marketing. But in reality, most marketing teams get to spend relatively little time on creative and strategy. There's the production and analysis work, which is where the vast majority of actual hours have always gone into in marketing, and then there's that sort of marketing operations, marketing technology, like infrastructure foundation to support that, which also it's been growing over time, but still relative, to the grand scheme of the marketing board, a relatively small part. Um, because AI is absolutely changing the cost curve, the efficiency curve of that middle bucket. Production analysis, it's becoming easier, faster, cheaper. And it's the
Mhm.
thing that's most disruptive to a lot of these marketing orgs because, I mean, again, it's not so much about saying like, oh, AI is just going to replace, humans, as sort of like a one-to-one wash, but it is the case that there's a bunch of work there that we needed humans to do that, no, actually, we can use AI, and AI is really good and efficient at that,
Mhm.
And so a lot of it then comes down to like, okay, now you've got this human talent that doesn't have to, spend it, recropping images in Photoshop, where do you redeploy that? And to me, this is where like leaning into on the strategy and creative side, man, you have the opportunity to do more experimentation, to be able to like, hone in on like more niche opportunities because you have the wherewithal. Like it's actually like
Mhm.
economically feasible, to now like,
Yes.
run these more experiments, to go after more of these niches, to think bigger because, again, these ideas that before it would have been out of your reach of time and budget
Mhm.
to make happen, you're like, oh no, actually we can do this. Like, people who lean in that direction, I think is phenomenal. And then I also think on the same side, like, just the value of marketing ops and marketing tech to support all that, I mean, all this content engineering, all this stuff, it doesn't happen automagically, and I think people who lean in that side of the, space have enormous value to offer. I think my one feedback that I always give, more senior executives, if all you do is take the savings on production and analysis and just put that to your bottom line, you're like, we need half as many marketers. Thank you very much. Isn't this great? I think that's an terribly short-sighted move, because that efficiency gain has no differentiation whatsoever. Everybody's going to get the benefit of that efficiency.
Yes.
And, so you have to really be thinking like, okay, maybe for those who are a little bit ahead of the curve, there's a little arbitrage opportunity at the moment, but the speed at which this is moving, that arbitrage opportunity is, going to vanish pretty quickly. Question becomes like, okay, when production and analysis is no longer any differentiator, yeah, how do you really think about changing the way your org leans into what it can do with creative, or what it does from a technology perspective to tie this stuff together, in a way that, yeah, doesn't happen automatically out of the box for people. Oh, I get
Right.
excited. I feel like there's so much opportunity for marketing, but you have to know where to put it.
Your point about efficiency, great, but you have to be in value creation. I couldn't agree more. How are you going to be sustainable as an individual or as an organization if you're not in value creation as well as in efficiency? It just doesn't work.
Funny how it always comes back to that eventually.
It really does. Well, Scott, this was really amazing. Thank you so much for talking to me. It was a fantastic conversation.
Oh, thank you so much for having me again. Yeah, I just love the chat, love getting your perspective on this. So thank you.
And so, shameless plug time. What do you want people to know from what you do? Where can they find your work? How can they reach out if they want to propose their logo for your map, for example? I'm sorry, no.
No, because I never get
Over
that.
this.
Yeah, well, yeah, I actually recently just started a newsletter too. Now that I'm doing this whole analyst thing full time. So if you go to chiefmartech.com, and that's Chief MarTech without an H at the end.
We'll put the links in the show
All
notes.
right.
Don't
Yeah, I'm
worry.
not sure if that was a brilliant
Yeah.
branding move or an absolutely boneheaded branding move. I think it was actually the latter. But anyways, yeah, come to chiefmartech.com. It's all easy to see right there.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we'll put the link in the show notes. Con, thank you so much for doing this. It was amazing. And I hope I get to reinvite you sometime soon.
It would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
So that's it for episode 13 of Knowledge Distillation. If today's conversation made you want to experiment with AI for analytics, visit us at askwhy.ai and try Prism. Thanks for listening. And remember, bots won't win. AI analysts will. Thanks to Tom Fuller for the editing magic on this episode. If you want to work with Tom, head to askwhy.ai and check out the show notes for his contact info.